You react the coal in what's called a gasifier, or a partial oxidation reaction. You react the coal, which is basically carbon, with steam and air, and you come out with a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Then you cool that, and you pass it over a catalyst where the carbon monoxide is reacted with water to make more hydrogen and some carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide has to be removed. So you come out with a tailored mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Then that mixture has to be passed over a separate catalyst where it's converted to any number of liquid hydrocarbons depending on the temperature, pressure, and contact time in the catalyst.
Okay, that's the PhD talking.
That's
okay. But in the end product, you wind up with that stuff we put in the gasoline.
The last step is the Fischer-Tropsch catalysis,
yeah,
the Fischer-Tropsch reaction, which you asked me about.
Yep.
And what comes out of it is gasoline that you can put in your car.
Okay, okay. Now this is not renewable, and today we hear so much about renewable energy, sustainable energy, almost like a mantra in the marketplace. When you are talking about North American hydrocarbons, you're talking about burning it up and it not renewing itself, just like we do with fossil fuels. Why are you suggesting that?
Well, first of all, if you're talking about 7 or 8 times the amount of hydrocarbon that exists in the reserves of the Middle East, I don't know that you can say this is not renewable. This is going to go on for a very long time.
Okay. Okay.
Now, if you're concerned about carbon production,
yeah, okay.
Then I think you have to think in terms of certain, at least the carbon dioxide that's produced in the processing, not the burning from the car, but the processing step, can be contained and injected into the earth. Can be injected into oil reservoirs, for instance, to facilitate recovery of oil.
Is that where the bigger problem is in the processing?
Well, that's the difference between burning conventional petroleum, which we've been doing for 100 years, and making gasoline from coal. The incremental carbon dioxide, the incremental insult to the environment can be captured and dealt with.
So it's not any worse than the fossil fuels?
Any worse than, these are all fossil fuels. They all come from fossils.
Oh, yeah.
You mean to say petroleum.
That's what I mean, yes.
And it's not, should not be worse than petroleum.
Okay.
Mark you, there are steps that have to be taken. There are steps in the beginning in the handling of coal and the processing of solid coal. There are steps that have to be taken in the handling of the intermediate gases. But we know how to do that. They can be done.
So you are really advocating the shales and the coal and all that because it's doable. We pretty much have the ability to do it now.
We own the hydrocarbon and we know how to do it. Now, shale is not so far along as coal. Tar sands are presently at 1 million barrels a day in the Western Canada. Involves huge vehicles that scoop out huge quantities of sand, which are washed, and then the oily material is heated and then eventually processed as synthetic petroleum.
They're doing that now in Western Canada?
They're doing that now in Canada.
All right.
Similarly, heavy tars would be treated in the same way. They'd be heat treated prior to going into a refinery. The coal, we're talking about direct conversion, which is nice because there's no incremental pressure on the refining capacity.
Okay, so I had mentioned that really this is an issue. Energy is going to be probably the platform of the next presidential election, and if not this one, certainly the next one. The one that has a coherent energy plan will probably get elected. So what are the government policies which can impact the energy shortages?
Well, first of all, the government has to take a leadership role in conservation. And that may be a carrot and a stick. It may require a tax on gasoline. And bear in mind, I don't think we've seen the top in the price of crude oil, which means you haven't seen the top in the price of gasoline. I wouldn't guess where that is, but as demand runs ahead and supply recedes, there are going to be tremendous forces at work to drive up prices and to create chaos and instability. So the price is monetary, the price can also be military. Okay, so
if you were the president, what would be? How would you design the the bill?
First thing I would do is I would tax gasoline.
Okay.
But there may be incentives. There may be ways to provide tax incentives to lower taxes for people who are more efficient, particularly in non-automotive areas. Now, there's been a lot of talk about CAFE standards.
Right.
That's
Conservation.
no, that's automotive fuel
Fish.
automotive fleet efficiency. Average fleet efficiency.
Okay.
What that says is that the General Motors, for instance, has to produce, on average, across all its vehicles, let's say 25 miles per gallon.
Okay.
Now, if they want to make an SUV that gets 10, they have to make a small car that gets 35. Okay, that's what the combined average fleet efficiency was about.
Okay.
That came out in the Carter years.
We've resisted that, though, complying with that.
Well, the automobile companies hated it, and when we had government, when we went into a period when I told you there was a glut in the 80s, and a lot of this seemed less important.
Yes, yes.
It seemed less important, and the automobile companies still oppose CAFE standards. I'm not so sure they're necessary. I'm not so sure that a gasoline tax doesn't do the same thing.
Okay.
So the government needs to take a leadership role in conservation. The next question is, how does the government take a leadership role in stimulating private investment in conversion of North American hydrocarbons to passenger fuels? Okay? Not so obvious. Not so difficult, but not so obvious. There have to be some guarantees. I mean, the first thing that people will say is, what are we going to do if petroleum goes back to $10 a barrel? Well, I don't think that's a realistic possibility, but the government might say, we'll put a floor in at $40 a barrel, $30 a barrel, whatever they can work out. That's one possibility. I'm reminded of something that was in Matthew Simmons' book, came out last year. Matthew Simmons is a petroleum geologist and investor, a lot of experience in Saudi Arabia. And he tells a story about the Saudi need to develop their gas reserves, natural gas.
Yes.
Natural gas is found to some extent dissolved in the oil, and it's also found below 15,000 feet. Yes. But below 15,000 feet, you never find oil. It's too hot, and it will have been converted to gas. So they put the word out, according to Mr. Simmons, come to Saudi Arabia and talk about development of our gas reserves. And everybody heard oil reserves. Yes. And they ran, and he says that there were traffic jams at the Riyadh airport.
But this is gas reserves.
And when the Saudis said, listen, fellas, you're not getting near our oil reserves. We're talking gas reserves. They said, okay, we'll do a little exploration. Well, they soon found that when you drill a well to 15,000 feet and there's nothing there, it's not a lot of fun. It's expensive, and you've risked a lot of money, and you've lost that. So they began to say, look, it's been nice, but we don't think we're going to do this.
Right.
And the Saudis said, we'll guarantee 9%, I'm quite sure the number was 9%, return on any money that you spend in the kingdom, knowing full well that these companies were capable of selling bonds in the bond market at 6%. So it is a guaranteed 3% for doing the job. The long and the short of it is that Saudi Arabia now has a natural gas production equivalent to about 1.5 million barrels a day, which they use for air conditioning, for fertilizer, for operating the...
This is just something that's happened in the last few years.
Last 10 years, probably.
10 years,
yeah.
So we also have a lot of natural gas, don't we?
Well, yes. Well, North American gas is just meeting our North American demands right now. In fact, it's tight. And the problem with gas is it's difficult to transport. Okay. So you have to contemplate some means. You have to process. Any of these things have to be processed. Coal has to be processed. Gas has to be processed because it has to be moved here. What the major oil companies want to do is liquefy it, move it as a liquid. Liquid is preferred in oil applications because you can pump it, you can handle it, it stays put.
Yes, yes.
Gas requires pressure, so they liquefy it. The problem with liquefaction of methane, of natural gas, which is 90% methane, is you have to go to 250 degrees below zero to form a liquid.